Welcome, everybody, to the podcast.
How are you feeling about yourself today?
I think pretty good. Yeah, I think my self-esteem this week has been pretty stable, pretty above average.
It
That's a subjective thing to actually quantify. It's like,
really
what's
is.
average? Yeah,
I guess average for you. Is it above
yeah,
your
that's what I was
base?
thinking.
Yeah, above your baseline this week.
I feel like my old above average is becoming my average. I think my self-esteem is increasing all the time. Not to high. I'm not getting arrogant or anything. I just feel like my self-esteem has been better than I've ever had in my life before. That is so annoying for me to say, I feel. But what about you? I want to deflect now. How is your self-esteem?
Well, I need to know why it's annoying for your self-esteem to have improved.
Not that it improved, but I'm like, oh, look at me. It gets so much better all the
Oh, okay.
time.
got you. I thought it's
I
because you
just
had like this like attachment to being like or emo or something.
no, I do not. No, I'm thrilled. It's wonderful. I had such terrible self-esteem for so long that it's wonderful to live in this space. It's just recognize how annoying it is to hear people be like, we're recovered and it's great.
Yeah. Well, I think we spoke about this in the Back to Basics series, but I feel like one of the bedrocks of disordered eating is that how you feel about yourself becomes very, very dependent on how you're eating and how
Yeah.
you perceive your body to be. So we are the Life After Diets podcast.
Ooh.
So I guess we'll be looking at it through that lens. And Stephanie just said, ooh, so she's about to play devil's advocate.
Well, it's not. It's just what's chicken or egg? You know, is it that self-esteem funnels from the way we eat, or does the way we eat is that a reflection of our self-esteem? Discuss.
Both
Yeah,
done.
it is both. It is. There you go. One influences the other and vice versa.
There is
Hmm.
a question, I guess, about which came first, because
That's
there
a
is a
good
whole
question.
there is a good question. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
I knew you were
Um
my podcast co-host for a reason.
yeah. I ask the questions and then you externally process your answers.
We've never said that out loud before, but that is essentially what is.
I had to give a lecture on binge eating and presenting the different theories. And one of the theories was called low self-esteem theory. That the whole reason people developed disordered eating, binge eating, eating disorders is because they just feel terrible about themselves and they're trying to feel better.
Hmm. I'm almost inclined to discount that quickly, but I'm going to think about it because do I know anyone who has an eating disorder or has struggled with this who has good self-esteem? Trying to think about that. I would have, I think, previously said no, but now that I'm a coach and like have a lot more people to observe, actually, well, there's like one person actually coming up in my mind. I'm like, I think she has pretty solid self-esteem, but she has an eating disorder. Of course, there's nuances of self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
But do you know, what do you think?
Well, I can't say that today. Anecdotally speaking, I very much feel like binge eating really tore down my self-esteem
Yeah.
because it was so against everything that I had believed about myself and my capacity for self-control that was just so out there. So I'm not saying I had some kind of perfect self-esteem beforehand, but I think it was again, I want to say average, but we don't know what average is, do we?
Yeah. I've always gotten the impression from you that your
Mm.
self-esteem was relatively solid growing up.
Yeah, I think relatively speaking, yes. That I think is probably true. I can remember on my eating disorder training them talking about this and this idea. And I was thinking at the time, well, actually, no, I think that the low self-esteem could come from, once the eating disorder has gotten hold. And the trainer's argument to that was, well, then you need to be asking them why they tried to lose weight in the first place. So if we were taking something like binge eating, the fact is, before my binge eating started, it was the first time in my life that I decided to lose a bit of weight. I don't feel like that came from a low self-esteem place.
Right,
The
right, right.
assumption on the
Yeah.
training was that's the only reason why anybody would try to restrict their food.
I don't think
I
so.
didn't see it as trying to restrict my food. I saw it as just, oh, eating a little bit less,
Yeah, I
and
agree.
that was the approach. I didn't follow a formal diet and I didn't do it particularly drastically, but it was enough to trigger something in me that I had no idea was there. And that my whole identity I felt like was shattered when the binging came along.
Yeah, I can see that for you. I don't think you necessarily have to have low self-esteem to want to go on a diet.
Mhm.
Absolutely not. I can contest that in lots of areas of people I know. But that then subsequently the physiological response that then happens that creates this cascade of behaviors that turns into a disorder can that in of itself disrupt and dismantle your sense of self-esteem. Yeah. Whereas my self-esteem was not was pretty crap before.
Do you think that there is a link between going further down the scale of restriction and self-esteem? Because I've sometimes wondered, to be able to deny your body what you know your body needs, for
Mm-hmm.
me, feels like it comes from a slightly different place than, especially when
Yeah.
we're talking about the binge as kind of protective. It's almost like, no, we need to eat and we're going to
Yeah.
try and fulfill this need, even if it gets out of control.
Yeah, I belabor this, but this is where I almost want to bring up what's the difference between self-esteem and safety, because there's something to restriction as it also has like a self-punishment
Mm,
piece. Yeah, this lack of like wanting to deny oneself, which kind of does sound like it goes hand in hand with not liking oneself very much or not respecting oneself. But again, these are different concepts too, like self-esteem versus self-respect versus the safety of being in our own skin. And that sometimes restriction is just like a way of keeping, because that's not, because sometimes you could look at restriction and anorexia and things as ways of keeping oneself safe, but just in a different way,
mhm.
not
So,
necessarily through self punishment, but through being less visible.
so just playing around with this a bit, this is not fully formed at all, but is it possible to have good self-esteem, solid sense of self, and still feel unsafe in yourself to that degree, though? Are those two things
I
kind of
think
like
that's
the
the qualifying
compatibility of
question.
that?
To that degree is I think the part of that that's part of the question. I think it's possible to have good self-esteem and to restrict. To that degree, no, usually not. I think there's shame
Hmm.
involved in that level of just it's a shame involved in them all in all eating disorders. I think, in fact, Emily Murray had a post recently that said something like eating disorder recovery is essentially shame recovery. It's
Yeah.
an interesting idea. And I guess, can you have shame and solid self-esteem? I guess that's more how I'm conceptualizing the question, and probably not. I think shame
Mm.
implicitly is a breakdown of the self and of the trust in the self and in the goodness of the belief of goodness in the self.
Do you think you can be critical of self and still have good self-esteem? Like, I'm not okay with myself right now, but from a kind of almost a sort of pragmatic.
Yeah, I'm like that.
Tell
Sure.
us about that experience,
Well,
Steph.
because, well, I don't know if that you can have, is it even possible to have a solid sense of self-esteem without feeling some level of, because otherwise you're assuming you're perfect. And that's inflated self-esteem. Like I feel like I have a solid, I prefer over good, solid sense of self-esteem. I think that in part is because there's things about myself I recognize that aren't, that they're not perfect and they're not stellar. I still could stand to work on some things. And I think that keeps me from having arrogance or being in denial. So yeah, I do. I think the key word there too is the pragmatic. Yeah, I don't shame myself for it. It's just that I know it exists. I know
Hmm.
that there's these pieces of myself that I'm like, oh, there you go again. And it's annoying, but I'm not shaming myself about it. And I think, yeah, that the more I'm talking through this, I think there's a relationship between shame and self-esteem. You probably can't have shame to big degrees. That's a good word, right? Big degrees. That's very descriptive of me stuff without having that have an impact on your self-esteem.
So then tell us about the correlation between your recovery and your self-esteem. Did they just go up together? Did one have to shift before the other one could shift?
Mm. Yes, they went together, but probably in a little bit of a tag along. Like, honestly, I think that pre recovery, my self esteem was rooted in the way I looked 90%. So, yeah, when I went into recovery, I'm not going to value that anymore, or that's not going to be my marker of who I am. And so, what else is going to take its place? And we've talked about this before. I don't think that I could have just done that without some other things to fill in the gap. At this time, I was starting to write again. My creativity went up. That's where I touched back in with my self esteem in my creative self. There was room for that. So that was increasing my, spending time creating more. And then my self esteem as such also went up with that. And then I didn't need my body to be that anymore as much.
Well, there is a way of thinking about it in feeling better about yourself enables you to do the things recovery is asking of you. So I would say that the way I felt about myself shifted before my behavior changed. And that came through the self-compassion lens of, I use the word forgiving myself for binging. Like now, obviously, I don't think there's anything to forgive as such,
Right.
but it was that kind of idea. And I might have said this in various ways before, of seeing myself as someone who was lost as opposed to somebody who was just out of control and weak.
So for you, self-compassion was a gateway to self-esteem.
Yeah, I think so. It was also a lowering of self-expectation as well that kind of came along with that. Because I was just putting this pressure all the time, going, no, I should be able to do this. I should be able to change my behavior. I should just not binge no matter how much I want to. And I kept fighting and pushing against the fact that I felt I should be able to control my behavior. And so there was a softening of that stance. And it was the softening that
Yeah.
opened up just possibility for change. It loosened the rigidity and the extremeness of the reactions to like control and binging.
Yes. You can see the relationship there. That's opening up doorways into the idea of comparison. When you're talking about lowering expectations set by whom? You know what I mean? Like, I think that expectations come from shoulds, and it's like the breakdown of that to feel safe enough to not do that. Like, what enabled you to get to a place of saying that was okay with you to be more self-compassionate, that you didn't need to perform or be these things that maybe, I don't know where those expectations came from for you. How do you even get to a place of feeling like that's the right thing to do?
Because I think I think I could just see how being as hard and rigid with myself, or trying to be hard and rigid with myself, perhaps is more accurate, led to a bigger backlash. It
Okay.
was like this realization that was starting to come the more I was observing and trying to understand myself and understand what this experience was.
So it's by that extension, we have to have some level of awareness in order to see that bigger picture. That would then it just makes sense to have more self-compassion. Like, this is just not getting me anywhere. It's exhausting me. It's causing me pain.
Yes. And I think a big part of that was, I think, for the last few years in my recovery, I had a meditation practice every night. And I was able to get myself into a place of calm stillness inside, regardless of whether I binged or not. And that was just through the practice of meditating at that time. So it didn't break the behavior. It wasn't like, oh, I started meditating and then I just felt more zen and I no longer felt the need to binge or try to control. But it shifted something. It showed that I could get myself into a place of calm and stillness, which I couldn't for years. I lived in a state of terror. I was so frightened of this like tsunami of binging that just kept going on and on and on. And that, I think, was a big change of realizing that, oh, I didn't know this conversation was going to go this way.
Yeah.
It was a shift of realizing that I can find a peaceful, quiet place in me, no matter what's gone on. And I hadn't really thought about it that way before, but that was a piece of the puzzle for me.
It's cool to watch you realize that. It's interesting too, because when you talk about that part of your recovery, and even to the extent that it exists in you today, coming back to your mat and the consistency of that, which you've also tied to the conversations we've had about consistency. Is the consistency the word? Self-trust and consistency.
Yeah.
It's like these things are all tied together. That's part of how I almost picture your self-esteem, not picture your self-esteem, but I feel your self-esteem is through those things. It's that chicken and egg thing where that enables the self-esteem, but then the practice of that then feeds the ability to stay consistent and to do the thing. And I think self-esteem is something that builds on itself once it gets some momentum.
Yeah, and as I'm thinking about it now, by being able to get myself into a physically calm place when I went to sleep meant I wasn't doing the whole panicking before I go to sleep, making all these grand plans about how I need to do it differently tomorrow, because I was able to feel calm so I could go to sleep with a calmer mind. And I think around that time, it was becoming less, the binges were like less intense. They weren't as big as they were up to that point. In my mind at the time, it still wasn't good enough because I was still binging. But if I really look at kind of, again, these little gradual shifts, when I try and talk about my recovery and how long it took, these little gradual shifts that, all sort of wove together.
Yeah. I'm thinking about how your theme generally is self-compassion. Like this was such a gateway for you.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking about how like mine was driven by anger. I think I just started to be like, what the all these rules and expectations about what we're supposed to be and do, and like the pressure of all the comparison. I started to get pissed off about it. The more I was noticing that, I was like, this is ridiculous. Especially as a mom, that's another area where there's a lot of like mom guilt, a lot of expectations. I used to feel low self-esteem because I didn't, and to this day, sometimes it still creeps up. Like, I am not a craft mom. I don't care. I just can't. I don't like it. And I felt the Pinterest mom pressure of, oh, well, so and so's mom brings in X, Y, and Z for the kid's birthday. And they come in and they do this. And on Valentine's Day, they have this thing on their Facebook page that they give their kids every. And I was trying to keep up with that all the time. And it got to this point where I started to, among other things, look at that stuff and be like, this is exhausting. It's making me feel bad about myself. Who said that I have to do all this? Somebody said it, and everyone's perpetuating it, including myself, and putting it on Facebook and all this. And I started to rebel against it. It started to feel like actually, maybe this isn't a me problem. Maybe there's just too much demand on us. And of course, this was lending itself to the food experience. I'm like, why do I have to be a size whatever? And why do I have to kill myself and eat this, all this perfectionism started to weigh on me. And I started to see that really more clearly and get mad about it. I wouldn't have said that at the time. I wouldn't have said I'm mad about it, but I was. I think that's the energy it was.
Mm.
And that's to your point when you start to recognize, to me, it was like, maybe this isn't a me problem. Maybe this is an expectation problem. And that's it. As soon as you start to consider that, then it's a seed and it starts to grow. And I think the more, and then I was like, yeah, actually, yeah. And I was like, fuck that. Sorry, I can't say that on podcast, but like
Try that again with more family friendly language.
family friendly. I mean, it's just not as the same, but it was just like, F that. I can't, is that okay to say?
It's not bleeping it, but we can silence the word.
Yes, it'll still come out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is, I mean, I use the word, I choose the word carefully because that's what I meant. And so it was this sort of energy giving that because I think my self-esteem, essentially the reason it was so low always before that, came from this idea that I really should be doing all these other things and the belief of that. I did not question that it was an external issue. It was always my issue. And when you believe that, then you feel bad about yourself because you feel like you're not measuring up. And so it was the first time I questioned that.
That's interesting because I'm thinking now about external pressure and how I experience it. And certainly, so around my body image and all of that, I didn't and don't feel a great deal of external pressure, particularly somebody who I don't know or care about. I don't care what you think about my body. I really don't.
Your family didn't either.
No, and that helps because like the family is like the blueprint
right
for the world. But even in other things as well, certain expectations of, I don't know, milestones in life or things like that. No, I mean, I'm 41 and I haven't got on the housing ladder. And I could have done if I'd made different decisions. And there are people that disagree with that decision. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care if this is some kind of expectation that I'm supposed to buy somewhere. I haven't known where I want to be, and I'm just gonna be fine with that. There's something about if I feel like somebody is putting that kind of pressure on me to make certain decisions, particularly about life and how I should be showing up in life, it doesn't even come from a place of real anger or rage. It doesn't feel like that. I'm just like, no.
Mm-hmm.
I think the anger and rage comes from when, like, you almost feel the claws of it in you, but
right.
It's really getting there. So you have to push back hard.
Correct. But I think I'm like you in that if there's an external obvious pressure, then I'm like, that's on you.
But
and
isn't
I don't
that a
care.
craft mum thing? Isn't that
no, and this is what I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
So I think there's a difference to me in external pressures that come from explicit things that you can see and name and be like, you're telling me to do that. I don't want to do that. Versus the insidious kind. I think this is becoming more and more real for me. There is something about imagery. No one ever said you have to make Valentine hearts collages and dioramas for your kids. But it was the suggestion subliminally through Facebook and Pinterest. There's something about when something's subtle and when something is quiet and like passive aggressive, that'll get into me. And then it has its claws in me and I didn't even know. I would outright reject it if you said it. I'd be like, no, I don't feel like I have to make X, Y, and Z for my mom. But then if I'm scrolling social media and I see that my neighbor did it and then so and so's kid, that's subtle and it gets in a way that did become an expectation that I put on myself. You know what I mean? There's a difference here. And I think that it's same with body image in some ways. Like imagery is really powerful. And I think because we are a social media culture right now and imagery is huge, we're getting a lot of information about what other people are doing via seeing it. And that is really persuasive. I think that's why it's so insidious is because it's not explicit necessarily. And we're not having the option of rejecting it. It's just sort of getting in there and suggesting it to ourselves as like a norm.
Yeah. Like kind of the difference then between overt pressure and covert pressure.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say about self-esteem too is that I think I said this to somebody yesterday. I forget how I put it. I said self-esteem. No. I said self-worth. I think it has roots in self-esteem, but self-esteem has roots in competence. I think. And I think that sometimes we don't want to talk about it that way because it sounds like we have to then perform or achieve to have self-esteem. And I'm 50-50 on that. I think that a lot of my self-esteem has come from my sense of my own competence in certain things. Now, what we think we need to be competent in, that's a great area for discussion. Again, I was assuming that I needed to be competent at being a Pinterest mom, like baking cakes for my kids on their birthdays. This was something, a pressure I put on myself and said, unless I do that, I'm not a good mom. I'm not a competent mom. Unless I'm size X, I'm not a competent female. But it's true that my self-esteem now has come from competence in my value areas. So it's kind of like, where are your values and honing in on those and then finding competence in those things or in things related to that. To me, that is something that has helped my self-esteem. And I don't want to misrepresent that. So there was something about being able to start my own business and to relate to people and to have people tell me that my words have impacted them in a certain way, which is my value. This is a value of mine. I love words. I love creativity. Writing is a thing for me. So to have people recognize that and say that, yes, I see your competence here has increased my self-esteem.
Well, that's a nice little segue into in the research, whenever they're doing social science research, psychological research, they have self-reporting forms that people can fill out as part of research so that you can measure somebody's self-esteem. And it's got a very catchy name of PYD-5C. And it consists of 34 items that serve as indicators for each of the 5 C's. The first C is competence, Steph. Do you want to have a guess or any of the other 5 C's that are supposed to be areas to measure to reflect self-esteem levels?
Sure. Control?
No.
That's so cool. Although I think it's implicit in competence. Character?
Yes.
Yes, I agree with that. Because P.S., I think your character and your values are coming from the same place. So yeah, that makes sense.
One that
I want to say connection because
yes.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Steph, if you want to say it, don't doubt yourself. Just say it.
Connection.
Yes.
And it's true. Yes, I think connection does. So how could I not have even put that second? Yeah.
One of the others rhymes with competence.
But it begins with a C? Confidence.
Yes.
Confidence. Oh, but that to me is confidence like is self-esteem. I feel like aren't they similar?
I agree. It's such a broad word that and again, like there'll be questions that are much more specific within the self-report measure.
Well, I feel like my self-esteem made me more confident, but I don't think it was confidence that gave me self-esteem. I feel like the umbrella is switched.
Yeah. And then the last C, which is a little trickier to get. I mean, it's technically doable, but it feels a little trickier to get. But caring. Now, how I interpret that is it almost feels a little bit like purpose, to care about stuff and to value things.
Okay. Yes, again, that's under the value. It coincides with that. Well, again, chicken and egg. If you don't have much self-esteem, you don't tend to care about Like that would inform your level of being able to care about things. And again, vice versa, that caring. I guess what they're saying is these are some associations
Yes.
with self-esteem. But okay, for the listener, if you have low self-esteem and that feels like a barrier, great. These are all associated concepts. Where do you start? How do you get better self-esteem? I mean, I could answer that, but I'll ask you.
Oh, but if you've got an answer like ready to go on the tip of your
Okay.
tongue,
As long as
mm.
I didn't want to
Oh,
take over.
bless you. No, no, you've got something.
Well,
Share it with the world.
I think it does come from first the awareness that we're speaking of having an awareness of what are the beliefs we have about and the expectations we have about where we have to be successful. Because as long as these expectations are there, there could potentially be a lack of confidence. And then identifying what your values are, which these are all things that we do together in our work, in our workshops and things. Identifying values is important so that you're more clear on what matters to me. What do I care about? What is worth my time to care about? Where do I have competence? Because I think they're more likely to be in places that you value. And then I think it goes from there. I think that it's clarifying to yourself what matters to you and giving yourself permission to let go of the other stuff. So there's a certain level of authenticity that is related to self esteem as well.
I would add on to that the connection piece I really liked. I don't think I would have guessed that in the C's actually, but when I saw it, I was like, yes, of
Yeah.
course. Because, I like to talk about connection and the 3 points of connection to feel connected to others, connected to ourselves, and connected to the world in some way. And I think often that place of not caring, I don't care about myself, I don't care about anything. So why would I even take any behavioral action because I just don't care? That if potentially a way in for some people, if this sounds resonant to you, is finding ways to plug in to something, to connect to something, whether it's the world, nature, animals, that side of things, whether it's people, whether it's yourself. Because I think when we are plugged in and connected to something, I don't even know if I can find the language, but not caring is like nothing matters. But if
Yes.
we're connected to something, something matters. Connected to ourselves, oh,
Yeah.
we can feel like we matter a bit. We're connected to others, oh, others matter and my relationships matter.
Yeah.
We're connected to the world, oh, the fact that I have a life that I'm living and I'm going to be on this planet for a certain amount of time, connected to that and finding some meaning in that.
Yeah.
Caring is the first part, and it's really interesting now because that word didn't make any sense to me when I first saw it on the list. But we have to care before we can build something like self-esteem if it's really low. Finding a way in to just care a little bit, to plant those
Yes.
seeds, to grow that. I
That's
think
that's related to the flow state argument, right? Not that not that that's an
argument. Who's
argument.
arguing about
Not an
flow?
argument. The flow state concept, which is a way of identifying what you care about, noticing where you get into those places where you do sort of. I have a client who struggles with depression, and I've been working with her for about 2 months, and we meet every week. And we have intense calls. And in this call we had yesterday, she started talking about something and lit up. And it wasn't even about the content. I said, I just have to stop you because you are alive right now. You're excited about something. And I was like, I've never seen this. This is a part of you I haven't seen. And she was like she sort of saw herself, I think, in that moment was like, oh yeah, yeah, I feel really jazzed. I feel really excited. There are these pieces, and we lose this in depression, I think, and in low self-esteem, and these things work together to sort of cover these parts up. But it's like when you find those gold mines of the stuff that you care about, that is like the energy gets untrapped. And I think capitalizing on that is a road in. It's an inroad. And then I think from that, there is connection. Like that's where we would connect. Again, that's a connection to self in there. But I think also for me, writing was a connection to myself, but it became a connection to others because I started writing for others and then hearing the feedback. And then that is the work. Essentially, it's just reinforcing to me that all of these things coexist. They're all interactive. So it's not necessarily like I need to improve my self-esteem. It's like you could choose one of the associated factors and start there, or this one or that one, and they're all going to have an inroad to another piece, to another piece, to another piece that eventually all connects to this concept of self-esteem. But I certainly didn't start out by thinking, all right, I really got to work my self-esteem to recover. It just happened by working on all these other things, or by starting with one.
You and I have spoken about doing an episode on joy. I
Yeah.
think I've kind of joked, I'm someone, I don't know that I feel that in touch with this emotion of joy. And I was talking to a friend about it, and I think I might have been off the back of us talking about doing an episode. I said, I feel a bit sad that I don't know that I really experienced this joy. And it was really interesting because then after that, when we'd be having conversations or voice notes, she kept pointing out to me, she'd be like, Sarah, when you talk about that, like, you sound joyful, you sound really
Yeah.
lit up, then are you not? And when I had to stop and think about it, I thought, is that joy? I don't know,
Yeah.
but being
I
lit
think
up,
so.
I guess it is. But I
Yeah.
don't know what I was imagining, almost maybe ecstasy or something.
Yes, and this is what I think the episode would be about. Because I think that we think about joy in this really esoteric way. Most of us don't relate to it that way. I think it's more this experience.
Yeah.
Caring. Joy is caring.
Yeah. It's laughing as well. Like anytime you
Yeah.
laugh, that is an act of joy,
Yeah.
unless it's a
Yeah.
cruel, evil, maniacal laugh.
Well,
But
depending on your value system,
I know, right?
that could provide you with. But yeah, it's like the glimmers. It's. But I guess we won't do an episode. It'll just be a little sub part of this one, but
Can I
it is
just ask you a
connected.
quick question about glimmers? This
Sure.
is really aside. Do you ever talk about glimmers or hear glimmers spoken about as the opposite to triggers?
I do hear it talked about like that.
As an opposite to
I
triggers?
don't think about it like that. I know
Yeah.
it's described as that. I think I can understand why they say it and why like you can think of it, a version of it, version
Yeah.
of glimmers as like that, but I don't think that's what it has to be. No. Like for example, the way I talk about glimmers is sometimes like it's February and in April there will come a day where I'm driving my car and I will feel the spring sun coming through my car window and landing on my arm because this happened to me last year and I was like, "Oh, it's almost spring." And that's not like that doesn't trigger. It's just like a yay moment. It's not like it's not as powerful as the trigger, as the
Well,
opposing force as a trigger.
yeah, we were getting very indignant about it because we were like, no, the opposite to trigger is not being triggered.
Yeah.
That's the opposite.
That's
I think
actually, yeah, yeah.
glimmers to me is just gratitude.
I I
Exactly what
did
we used to call gratitude. We've just given it a new
no,
name,
I
had
did
a
you
whole
see my post?
branding.
I said glimmers. I have a post on
Oh, I
this. It
don't
says
read posts about glimmers because it irritates me.
I said glimmers are gratitude journals for the nervous system.
Okay. Well,
That's what I
there we
said.
are. We're on the same page.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to self-esteem. Although maybe
Okay.
glimmers,
They're related.
everything's related to everything.
That's true. We would just have one episode if we had to do it that way.
There is a book, a relatively well-known book called Six Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden. And these pillars are more like what we need to do or to embody to have good self-esteem.
Okay.
Because it's a book, it's about like how we can improve it. So what are the things that if we are intentional about,
That we should get some good self-esteem out of it.
yeah, and they're more like concepts opposed to like focusing on work or doing
Oh,
this more. So one of them is self-acceptance.
we're talking about the same things in different words.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Self-responsibility, self-assertiveness. And these two,
Mm.
I'm kind of are annoying me a bit because they sound kind of the same to me. One is living consciously, and then he's got living purposefully, and then personal integrity.
I feel like there's an underpinning of all of this that if you don't have that, it's like, how do you have access to these other things? Because I agree that these things are all, but in my mind, I feel like the self responsibility like came after, like you can do that. You have access to that once there's something under it that provides you with enough self esteem to be able to access that. Like, what comes first? There's something else. Maybe it is acceptance in some way. But how do you get to that? Like if I'm thinking of somebody who's just like really lost around this and is like, I just don't like myself. I don't think there's a reason to. I don't even know that I feel like I deserve to have good self-esteem. Like from that place, there's got to be some kind of spark of something to it, even ignite the desire to get to.
Mhm. One of the things that I would ask somebody who would come in and say that kind of thing, they don't like themselves, they think they're the worst person ever. I'll say, tell me what's so bad about you. And it's a really hard question to answer. And sometimes they might come up with an answer. They might go, I don't know, let's say they go, because my body is unacceptable. Or they might just say, because I think I'm ugly.
Mm-hmm.
Be like, okay, well then somebody else who looked similar to you, but not you, would that make them the worst person ever? And of course, they're going to say no. Now, I know that this is a rational exercise. It's not going to be a case of rationalizing something away, but it's trying to experience the conflict between how we feel. Because if we really then try to go, why am I so terrible? And any of those qualities, you put them into someone else and you're not going to feel the same way about them
Correct.
or
Yeah.
think the same way about them as you do about yourself. What's basically happened is when you were younger, you came to this conclusion about yourself as being wrong or unacceptable in some way. And it has been this terrible misunderstanding. There's been an awful misunderstanding somewhere. When someone has self-esteem that is that low,
I think at this point we're talking about self-worth.
how do you define the difference?
That's what I'm saying is like this is a blurry line, but to me, extremely low self-esteem to the degrees where somebody can't, that I introduced by saying, you know, what if someone's in this place where they just can't even get there? I think I've crossed over into this is where we're into low self-worth. And they are almost one and the same sometimes, but they're not quite. And it almost makes me think we should do an episode on self-worth as a follow-up because it is a I think it's just like, yeah, they're almost one and the same. They're not quite though. Self-worth to me is exactly what you were just saying, is that there was something that happened at a very young age that convinced you that you were bad and was internalized as shame. And how I see that currently in my own work, working with trauma, is like that perspective, being able to understand that as a big misunderstanding. Like that was something that overwhelmed the capacity of your ability to process something about the world and the safety of the world, and got internalized and made you believe that you were bad. And that to me is what a lot of trauma work is about. And trauma work is very definitively tied to an idea of self-worth.
So can you have one without the other? Would you say that you can have some self-worth and still have really low self-esteem?
Yes. Yes.
What would that look like?
That is what I identify with. I think that I did have a sense of self-worth somewhere. And again, I think self-worth is a feeling. It's not a logic. It's a feeling of I can't even tell you why I know I'm worthy or unworthy. I just feel that I am or I'm not. And I think underneath everything, I did feel like I had worth, but I had really low self-esteem. I felt something about myself that had hope in it, but explicitly, I just felt like I had all these reasons why I sucked. And I was influenced by them. I also felt those things, but not to the level of having no self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
Almost. It gets close, but it's different.
There's quite a nice distinction made here on thriveworks.com. They say, but two appear to mean virtually the same thing, self-worth and self-esteem. If you have self-worth, this means that you value yourself. You believe that you're a person who is worthy of respect. Meanwhile, self-esteem is your level of confidence in your worth and abilities.
That competence thing again. Yeah. I think we use self-esteem, maybe even in this episode, we've talked about it in a way that we really mean self-worth.
Yeah,
in
I think
some
we have
parts of
used
the
it a bit
episode.
interchangeably here. Yeah.
Mhm.
Sorry,
Do we have to
guys.
start again?
Yeah, I think we do.
This is literally the process of learning for us too. But yeah, I think we've gotten to a place of saying like which is which. But to be fair, I think that we talk about self-esteem interchangeably as self-worth. Like, so the concept of what we're talking about I think it's what we're saying remains. It's just that the word itself, I think, is blurry.
Yeah. You don't think we've null and voided everything we've said?
No, I do not.
No.
But self-worth is I think is a great topic. And I think there's more to say about it that we didn't get in through the lens of self-esteem. But we're out of time.
We
So
are out
we
of
will have
time.
to do that another day.
Yeah. Bournemouth and Brighton. Go.
Go. I'm
Go
going.
there.
I'm going. No. Listeners, coming up in May, on Monday, May 20th, Sarah and I are going to be in Brighton, which I've never been, with Marcus Kane of the Strong Not Starving podcast. We're going to be hosting an evening event entitled Non-Diet Wellness. Can it really work? We're each going to be having a talk, and we're going to have a Q&A, and it'll be a fun
And a
little night.
mingle.
And a mingle,
To meet
connection,
you.
great opportunity for some self-esteem building. Yeah. And then the following Thursday, so the same week, I'm going to obviously be over there. So this is why we planned it like this. And I will be with Sarah. Sarah and I will be hosting can you do this part? I just know I'm good at this.
Yeah, sure. I'll take the baton. We are doing a whole day event on the Thursday for our listeners, and it is going to be down on Branksome Beach in Bournemouth. And we are going to be doing some nervous system reset activities. We're going to be having an amazing lunch on the beach. It's basically going to be a day retreat down on Bournemouth Beach to connect with other like-minded folk. And at the end of the day, if you want to join me to jump in the sea, I'm going to be doing that too. For a bit of cold water therapy, because we know how much Steph loves the cold water therapy.
Ugh.
Because it just fixes everything, right, Steph?
Yeah, it's so good. So good. It's actually a non-diet wellness day. I mean, I suppose you could look at it like that. My recommendation to any US folks out there who have the capacity and the means, just get on a plane. Just get on a plane and fly on over and spend a week down at the coast of of England and come to the events.
You basically just invited the US folks. You've alienated the Canadians, the
I'm gonna boom
Australians,
boom.
the Europeans. No. I'm gonna put it back
No.
in if you take it out. It's like that's the problem with America. You feel like you're the only country.
Because in my mind, like it's too far. It's too far for Australians to fly. I guess you'd have to fly if you were like in Germany too. Darn it.
I'm only teasing you.
I know.
It's one of those things, isn't it?
Yeah, in my mind. Well, because it's US and
it's US and the rest of the world, right? That's how you guys think.
No, it's US and England representation.
For those of you in Europe, it's just a short plane ride away. Come join us. I'll be happy to see you, even if Steph won't.
Well, I just want Americans to come. So
anyway, details to buy tickets and book your space will be in the description below.
The description.
Yeah, that's right.
Bye.
Yeah. What do you call it? A summary?
Is it show notes?
Oh, show notes. Well, that doesn't. I'm thinking YouTube. Because I'm always in my YouTube brain. Call it a description on YouTube. Call it show notes on podcast.
Fair enough.
So whether you are on YouTube or whether you are on the podcast, it's gonna be.
I want to give a shout out to our YouTube listeners, by the way. We have like a cool little community of YouTube listeners that I like only know by their screen handles but they're there every week saying like, good job.
Yeah.
So, and I just wanted to say hi to you. Yeah. Hi. Hi, YouTube listeners.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right then.
Ta-ta for now.
Over and out.